Thus far, we've been creating applications with Python that are all console-based or text-based. But we can create GUI or Graphical User Interface applications with Python. In order to do that, we have to use a library called tkinter, which we'll import. Now, you'll hear this maybe also pronounced tkinter, or sometimes people just pronounce it kinter. I believe the proper pronunciation really is tkinter, because this is based on a language called TCL-TK, in which the TK stands for Toolkit, and the TK is the Graphical User Interface library for TCL, which stands for Tool Control Language. I actually did some programming in TCL-TK about 10 years ago. We had students working out at Honeywell Aerospace as interns, and I was on site as a faculty member 1 day a week overseeing those students. But since I was a programmer, they also put me to work doing some programming in TCL-TK, and we were working on the Orion project, which was the replacement for the space shuttle, and we were using TCL-TK to maintain the database of all the parts and track the requirements and the specs for all those parts and to be able to run reports. And so I was designing those reports and the tracking with TCL-TK. So here's our Python program, a little bit different than we've seen before, and it is a graphical user interface. So I have a label here that's simply showing an image, and then I have another label with some text in it, and 5 buttons. When I click one of the buttons, I'm going to click the button that says ASU, it changes the text of the label, but also the background color and the foreground color to match the colors of that institution. So of course ASU we know is maroon and gold. U of A, University of Arizona, Northern Arizona University, Grand Canyon University, and of course our very own South Mountain Community College. Graphical User Interface applications use event-driven processes where it's listening for different events, such as clicking on a button, to do something. And what it does is defined in various functions. Let's look at how to build this project. The first step in creating a GUI application is to visualize what that application is going to look like from the graphical standpoint. And to do that, I use a tool called a storyboard. And storyboards go back to Hollywood when they would sketch out what different scenes would look like. We use that in software development as well to get a look and feel for what the program will look like. We might use those storyboards to get financial backing for our project or at least share our vision with the client. So I usually do this on paper and pencil. You can use various software tools to do this as well. And what I'm starting with is the square of my window. And we're going to use a method, it's actually an initializer called TK, and it's going to create this window. But we need to give it a name. And so every object in our GUI should have a name. So I'm going to name this object main window, main_window. Then I'm going to add a label that I'm going to call LBL logo. And the LBL is Hungarian notation that's used in other languages such as Visual Basic. I like it because it visually gives me a clue in my code of what kind of object this is. Everything that starts with an LBL I know is a label. So LBL logo, and I use camel casing here, so I capitalize the L in logo. And it's going to contain an image. And I have an image that I'll provide of the nameplate for our course that I use in our checklist and our assignment PDFs. So I'm going to display that up here. Then I want another label. And here the label is going to contain some text such as click a campus button below. And the text that label is going to change as we run our program. As you've already seen, it's going to contain the name of the institution. I'm going to name this label LBL Campus. Then I'm going to create a frame object. I'm going to name it frame1. Now the frame object, in this case, is not really going to be visible. We can make it visible by changing a border color and a back color. In this case, I'm going to kind of blend in with the application itself and use the same background. But a frame allows me to use it as a container to contain other objects. And you'll see as we build this using the pack method of tkinter, it's going to build it from the top down. You can think of these as all kind of different layers in our project going from the top down. Well, I want to put some objects going across at the same level or same layer. So I'm going to use the frame as a container to do that. Then inside that frame, I'm going to create 3 buttons. And we'll name those BTN ASU. So my Hungarian notation for a button is BTN. So BTN ASU, BTN U of A, and BTN NAU. Then I'm going to create another frame below that. Name it frame 2, and it's going to contain 2 more buttons, BTN SMCC and BTN GCU. So a lot of times you might have a UI, UX expert creating your storyboard who gives that then to the software developer to actually create, or it might be a graphical artist who does this. But as a programmer, it's good to have some graphical skills and to be able to draw out these storyboards, and I think also to use programs like Photoshop to create graphics such as the logo we're going to have in the nameplate. I did that all in Photoshop. So it's one of the reasons we have Photoshop in our program is I really believe software developers need some graphical skills because everything is very visual these days. So that's what our project is going to look like. Now let's go into Python and actually create it. I've created a new Python file called tkinter campus demo. We're going to start by importing the tkinter library. That'll give us access to all the controls in tkinter to create our GUI interface. And then I'll add a comment, just the file name of my program. And we've been talking about object-oriented programming. You're going to see a lot of people who use tkinter maybe in other videos or other tutorials. They use a more traditional approach to creating the interface, just in a top-down approach. Since we've been talking about object-oriented programming, I'm going to show you how I create the user interface within a class. And I like to use this simply because we're talking about object-oriented programming, but it also makes it easy if you want to have multiple windows to create different classes for your windows. So we're going to start with a class. I'm just going to name it myGUI. I'm going to capitalize the GUI and a colon. And we're going to create the initializer that's going to generate the interface for our project. And remember the initializers underscore, underscore, init, and 2 more underscores. And it's going to have a parameter of self. Next, I'm going to create a couple constants for our colors. And I like to do this at the beginning here because I'm going to have multiple objects using these values. If I want to change the background color on several different objects, I can reference it as BG color. Then I can change it just here and affect all those objects. Same with all my buttons are going to be the same background color. I created a color called light gray. 6Ds. Of course, this is the red, the green, and the blue values. And when they're all the same, we have different levels of grays. This is a fairly light gray. The FF, of course, is white, which is, I suppose, the purest level of gray and white we can get, or black and white we can get. So if I want a little bit darker gray, I could bring these down. I might do in 6As or 6/9s, or they could be things like A7, A7, A7. As long as they're all the same values, we're going to get a level of gray. Next I'm going to create the main window. I'm going to start by giving it a name. And remember in our storyboard we called it main underscore window. I want to precede that with the word self, which is the class itself, a reference to the class. And it's going to reference the self object up here. And to create my window, I'm going to reference tkinter and call its tk method. So that really is the initializer for tk. That will create my main window. Next, I want to customize that window. I'm just going to paste in some code here and we'll go walk through this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set the background color. I'm going to use self.main underscore window dot config is another method within tkinter, and I can change properties using config. So I'm going to set the background equal to BG color. And you have a little note here, you can also use configure rather than config. The next line I commented out, but this is how you would change the size. So I could do self.main underscore window dot geometry, and then the geometry method takes a string, and that string contains the width times the height plus the x coordinate and the y coordinate. And that will specify where it occurs and what size it is. I'm going to let it use the default. It's going to create a window, whatever size it needs to be to match all the controls I put into it. And then I'm going to give it a title. So self.main_window.title, and my title is going to be CIS156 tkinter demo. Next, I'm going to add a label with the course logo. And once again, to save some time, I'm just going to paste in some code here. And so here I'm creating an object called logo. It's a subcontrol within the self class, so it's going to be self.logo equals, again, I'm going to call it tkinter, and there's a method called PhotoImage. And one of the parameters here is I can specify the file. And so I have this file called cis156_header.png. It's a PNG file, and it's going to be located in the same folder as my Python file. So that's important. So it finds that file looking in the same folder. As I mentioned, you can download this file from our Canvas course site if you're following along. Just make sure you put it in the same folder as your Python file that you're creating. So that's going to create this image out there called logo. And then I'm going to create another label. So I'm going to name this label LBL logo, tkinter.label. It's being placed in my main window, so it's a child of my main window. So I went self.main_window, that's the parent. And then I'm going to give it an image of self.logo. So it's going to display this logo that we created in the previous line. And then self.lblogo.pack. Now what is pack? Pack means go ahead and show this control. So it wouldn't appear until I do the .pack. Now there's other ways to display things, but I'm going to use pack in this throughout this example. And one of the things I can add in pack is some parameters inside the parentheses. I'm going to pad some distance around that logo of 10 pixels on the X, that's going to be the left and right, and 10 on the top and bottom, that's pad Y. So we have pad X and pad Y equals some value. And you may want to play around with those values. You'll see how things adjust as you adjust those numbers. And I have a stray semicolon there because I've been programming in C#. I'm going to get rid of that. Next, I'm going to add another label. This is going to be that campus label we saw on our storyboard. So it's going to be named self.lblcampus. Again, it's equaling tkinter.label. And some of the parameters I'm going to put here, of course, the parent is self.main_window. But I'm going to put some text in that campus label. Choose a campus below. I'm going to give it a width of 32. Now this is in text units. It's roughly the number of characters that could be displayed in that label. And that's going to be the average character width. So if you're using a font where each of the letters have a different width, such as an I is much less than a W, it's sort of the average of the letters in that font. Height is going to be double the height of that font size. In this case, so it equals 2. I'm going to center my text inside that label, so anchor equals center. I'm going to give it a border width of 3, so I get a nice little border around that label. And there are various styles where we can have that label appear. I'm going to use one called sunken. It's going to look like it's kind of recessed into my application in a 3D look. And the other options there are just solid, raised, sunken, flat, ridge, and groove. So the raised would be sort of the opposite of sunken. The ridge and groove kind of changes the borders on that label. And you can experiment with those different options. I'm also going to use the config here to change the background and the foreground. And I can use named colors. So here, and these are standard colors. So white and black are already defined within tkinter. And then self.label.self.lblcampus.config, I'm going to set the font equal to Arial 27 bold. So the font face, the size, and the attribute of that font. And then finally, I need to pack that to make it display. So lblcampus.pack, and I'm going to again pad this on the top and bottom just so things don't run quite together as it's building this thing from the top down. So I'm going to give it a pad Y of 10. I don't care about the pad X. There's nothing on to the left and right of this object. And the reason I did the pad X up on the LBL logo is since we're building our window based on the objects we're putting into it, I do want a little bit of edge. I'm anticipating this course logo as being the widest object in my program. And so I gave it a pad X of 10 just to put a little margin on the left and right between the logo and the window frame. Next, I'm going to add a frame, and we're going to put our 3 buttons inside that frame. So I'm going to create my frame of named self.frame1. It's equal to tkinter.frame is the object, and the parent is self.main_window inside the parentheses is the first parameter, and then I set the background color to be the same as the window background, so it's going to blend in. You're not going to see the frame. The nice thing here is if I want to change the background, I don't have to change the background color for my window and for the frame. I can just simply change the constant up here, and that's going to adjust the colors on both of those objects. So that's why I do some of these colors up at the top. Next, we're going to add in the 3 buttons. So my first button is going to be named btn_ASU. It's going to be a object of tkinter.button, and the parent is not main window. The parent in this case is frame1. I want it inside my frame. I'm going to set the text to ASU. The background I'm going to set to this LT gray or light gray that I've defined up here at the top. I'm going to make the width 15 units, the height 3, and then my foreground I'm going to have be black, and that should be the default anyway. And then I'm going to give it a event. And so I have command equals self.goASU. We're going to create a function called goASU a little bit later, and what we want to have happen when the user clicks this button is what we'll put in that function. Now I made a little note here because I started doing this on a Mac. I'm playing around with it on a Mac versus a PC. And one thing I discovered and confirmed in some forums is that the background color does not work on a Mac. So in the PC, we can change the background. On a Mac, it always makes the buttons this kind of a, on a Mac, it always makes the background a light gray gradient. Next, I'm going to paste in the code for the next 2 buttons. So we have our self.btn_U_A. So it's going to, again, be tkinter.button. Frame, or the parent is going to be self.frame1 again. Text equals U of A. Background the same as light gray, width 15, height 3, foreground black. But here my command is going to be self.goUofA. And then the NEU button is next. And it's going to, again, be a parent of self_frame1. Text is NEU. Same parameters as far as background, width, height, foreground. And the command is self.goNAU. Now all we've done, of course, at this point is build those objects in memory. We need to display them in our GUI by packing them. So here's the code to pack them. I'm going to pack frame1. I'm going to give it a little pad Y of 5. So basically be 15 units between my label above it and this frame. And then each of the buttons I'm going to pack, and I'm going to set the side equal to left. So it's going to build it starting on the left, and then build each one on the left, but it's going to be next to the right of the one before. And again, I'm going to do a little padding as far as X in this case, so there's a little bit of space in between those buttons, in between the button and the frame, though we wouldn't necessarily see the distance between the frame and the buttons, because we don't see the frame. But we want some distance in between these buttons. So I'm going to test my program at this point, but I have a couple of methods here that I've defined of goASU, goUofA, goNEU. I need to create those before I test, so I don't get an error. I'm going to come down a few blank lines. I'm going to paste in that method for goASU. So I'm defining it as a method. So I have the def command, goASU self. And then all I'm going to do here is change the text of that LBL campus. And I use config to do that. Self.lblcampus.config. I'm changing the text to Arizona State University. I'm going to use the config command again to change the background to maroon or the background to gold. And then I actually redid it a second time because ASU, it's not just any maroon or gold, it's a very specific shade. So I want to show you another way to do that. And you can reference those specific shades or hues using the RGB hexadecimal values. So the red in this case for the maroon is 8C, the green is 1D, and the blue is 40. And for the gold of ASU, the red is FF all the way up. C6 is the green, and 27 is the blue. So I could comment either one of these lines out. This third line is gonna supersede that second line, so we'd never really see that shade of maroon and gold. That's the default. We're gonna see the ASU specific shades. I'm going to basically do the same thing for the other two. Here then is my Go U of A function, again inside the parentheses of self, and I'm setting the text to University of Arizona, and I'm setting the background to a dark blue that U of A uses, and a red, it's another shade that U of A specifies of the red. NAU, same thing, I'm going to set the text to Northern Arizona State University, I'm going to change the background to their gold, and the foreground to their navy blue. Now, there's one more thing I have to do because I have to call and create an instance of my GUI class. I'm going to create an instance name of my_GUI, all lowercase, equals, and then a reference to my class of my GUI, all uppercase except for the Y, and I need to specify that that's a method that I'm calling. It's going to call the init method, which is defining our whole interface. And I'm going to save this, and let's run and see if we've got everything working at this point. So I'm getting an error here in line 9 of self.main window, and it should be an equal sign, not a minus sign there. So let me go back and change that. So this should be an equal sign. And we run this again. So there's my project running. I'm getting the nice graphical user interface. Let's see if these buttons work. I'm going to click ASU, U of A, and NAU. So what I need to do now still is build that second frame with those buttons. We already know how to do that. And you'll notice how basically we get some padding in between these objects. That's from our pad Y, and the distance here between our buttons is from the pad X on those buttons when we packed them. I'm getting a little bit of space between my logo and the window frame. Okay, let's go back and finish this. So back in the building of the interface, we need to add in the frame, the second frame, and our two buttons. So I just pasted in that code. I've got self.frame2. Again, it's going to be a frame object, same background color. It's going to be parented by our main window. And then I specified the next two buttons, BTN GCU and BTN SMCC. Pretty much the same process we did on the other three buttons, except it's going to call a command of self.go_GCU and self.go_SMCC. So we'll have to create those two methods. And then finally I pack those. I pack the frame and then the two buttons inside that frame, again using side equals left and giving a little bit of space between those. So a little trick is I'm going to add some space between this frame and the bottom of my window. And to do that, I'm just going to create a label. I'm going to name it LBL spacer. I'm going to set the background and the foreground the same to the label, specify no text, height and width. So the height, I'm just going to give it 1 unit, the width is 5. Width is sort of irrelevant here. If I want more space, I can increase the height width, and I'm going to simply pack that. So the last thing we need to do is add the functions for our go_GCU and go_SMCC. So again, I'm just going to paste those in. Same as before, I'm just changing the text and changing the background, the foreground color to the colors for those two institutions. For the foreground, I'm using white for both of those. I don't specify it as a hexadecimal, although you could do a hashtag FFFFFF, or you could even use that BG color in place of the white designation. Notice that you can use either single quotes or double quotes. All right, let's run this and see if this all works. So here's my application. I've got a little spacing between the last frame and my window. We saw that earlier the ASU, U of A, and NAU all worked. Here's the Grand Canyon University and our South Mountain Community College. So those all function. That's our first GUI application using labels, buttons, and our window, and also bringing in an image. If you just jumped into this video and haven't seen the prior videos to this, I invite you to check out my Python playlist of videos. And if you'd like to be alerted to future videos that I create, you can click my picture up in the top right and subscribe to the channel.